Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. My name's Chandra and I make videos about reading, writing, and all things books. Today's video is redefining SMART goals with 300 things. A lot of you, I'm sure, are familiar with SMART goals, which is the acronym specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. But sometimes that can be a little vague, especially when you're first starting to set goals. Although it's a conclusion that I've come to as a result of going through 300 things. So I just wanted to share my perspective on what that means when your goals are things that you want to achieve, but you're not forcing yourself to achieve them. Like they're not New Year's goals, as it were, the traditional, I'm going to do all this for New Year's. It's like, no, these are the things that I'm going to work on, and it's going to take a lot of time over the year, and they may not all happen in the first 30 days or first quarter or first 2 quarters, and that's not the point. But having the awareness that this is a process that you're going through and figuring out what parts of the process work best for you and where you want things to go. So the first part of that is going through the process helps you set better goals. You really don't learn to think of goals in specific terms till you set specific goals. And what I mean by that is you can have the idea to set goals, you can have an idea of what goals you want to set, but until you actually set them, you don't really know how specific they need to be, or how you want to measure them, or what's realistic for you, if it's relevant to what you're wanting to accomplish, and if the time frame that you've set around it actually makes sense. Until you start somewhere by setting some kind of goal, you don't know if you're aiming too high or too low. You've got to start with something. Even if it doesn't end up being any of those things, you can't expect the first time that you start setting goals or change the way that you set goals for everything to come out perfect and be seamless. So the second part is, what's wrong with non-specific goals? As you can see, Dobby is having a moment. The biggest problem I've had with setting non-specific goals is that I don't know when I've achieved them. It's something that it leaves it very open-ended, so even when you do achieve the goal, it still feels very vague. And can you not, Dobby? You're not being cute. Even when I've completed what I set out to do, it's so vague and so loose that I'm like, did I? Or was that too easy? Did I actually get to my objective, or did I check a box because what I had set out wasn't exactly what I meant, or I didn't really know what I meant until I got into it, and it's like, well, technically I achieved this goal, but it doesn't feel like I achieved but it doesn't feel like I achieved the goal because it's not exactly what I meant by it. Those are the kinds of things that happen when you first start out setting the goal. You don't know how to be specific enough, so when you get done with it, maybe it's not exactly what you had in mind, and then you kind of lose part of that sense of accomplishment, because by the time you get to the end of it, you're like, what I really meant was this. Number 3, how do you know when your goal is measurable? How much do you want? The measurement piece, I think, is the next big thing for me. I might say I want to read more. If I've not started tracking how much I'm reading, what does reading more look like? Does reading more mean that I want to set aside a certain amount of time every day or every week to read? Is that what reading more means for me? Or does it look like reading a specific number of books? If you just say read more, it's vague enough that, okay, I sat down and I read a magazine article. Is that what I meant by read more? So it starts to take that specific and the measurable and put them together. It really does put them all together, because if you're not specific, then what can you measure? There's nothing to be measured. And if you haven't already measured something, Not to say, I'm going to start by saying I'm going to read more, just to say I'm going to calculate how much I read. I'm not going to make any change to that. Year one isn't necessarily about making changes. It's just about tracking and seeing where you are so that when you measure, the next time you set the goal, it's clearer. But by being specific, you have something that you can measure. And when you measure it, then you figure out the next step, which is number 4. Why do you need to know the measurement? You might set the bar too low or too high and still feel unsatisfied with your progress. So once you've been specific and you know what you want to measure, then you find that you can adjust your goal. Because before, you're basically pulling a number, an arbitrary goal out of thin air, maybe because you see someone else doing it, or maybe because that's what everyone's talking about, or because some vague statistic said this is how much you should be reading. That's not helpful if it doesn't work for you. So this is why the 300 things has really helped me clarify that, because it does take so much and break it down for you. If you start out with, I want to read more books, eventually at some point in your list of 300 things, you're going to get down to, I want to read 5 books. I'm going to read 10 books, 15, 20, because you can put those each on the list as single things. And as you go through in this judgment-free way, you see how much of that you check off the list. And if reading more is a priority for you, and next thing you know, you've read more than you've ever read before, it's because you're measuring it and you've set it as a goal, and you know clearly 100% what that goal looks like and what meeting your goal looks like. So it's a way to provide additional validation. If you don't get any more specific than saying I want to read more, how do you know when you've achieved reading more? You have no idea, and then it doesn't feel the same. You don't get that same sense of accomplishment because you didn't define more. Number 5, it's something you can actually get. Is it something you have control over? This is for attainable as well as if it is relevant to you. If it's not like the goal of reading more, it's maybe going on a specific trip. Is that a reasonable goal for you? Is that something that you will actually be able to do in a set time span, or is it a long-term goal? It's okay to have long-term goals in there if it's relevant, if it's something that you're really interested in, but be clear, not everything on your list is going to be time-based. And I know that's like the next thing, but not everything will be time-based. If your goal is to read a certain number of books, that doesn't have to be time-based either. It might be that you'd like to accomplish it in a year, but if your total goal is that you want to read 400 books, that can be on your list for quite some time, and that's okay. You don't have to make the time basis something that everyone else is doing. If you have, your long-term could be, I want to read 3,000 books in my lifetime. That could be a goal. It's not specifically time-based, as in you don't know how much time to achieve it, but you're working towards that goal, and every book that you read is progress towards that. So the way that you set your time basis doesn't have to be the same way that everyone else does. Yes, a lot of people do yearly reading goals, but it might be a monthly reading goal of, I want to read 5 books a month. I want to read 1 book a month. It's not so much about the time base, it's about how relevant it is to you, because if everyone else is setting a yearly reading goal and that's not practical for you, then there's no reason for you to set that goal. And the 300 things is one of the things that helps you define what's relevant to you specifically. It does get easier to make your goals SMART, but you have to start somewhere in order to figure out what that looks like for you. Number 6, set goals that don't depend on other people. Some things do require teamwork, but make sure your team is on the same page. Do they know what the goal is? So if you have most of your goals or a lot of your goals depending on other people, those are things that are likely to slip or not necessarily work out the same way that you want them to. But be aware of that. Make most of your goals as dependent upon your own success as possible, because then when things don't necessarily work out, or people have changes to their schedule, or they're not able to do the same thing that you'd like them to do, or they're not able to prioritize the same way that you'd like them to prioritize, your whole system doesn't come crumbling down. Make as much of your goals dependent on yourself as possible. Number 7, relevant may apply more to the workplace, but when you're working on a personal goal, how does it apply? When you're at work, who makes sure you aren't just doing busy work? What I mean here is like applying the same approach to your personal goals as you have to your work goals, in that you are looking at the long-term objectives. For your work goals, it's feeding up to something. Maybe they're not goals that you initially set, but whatever your department goals are, your department goals roll up into the company goals as a whole. So your personal goals should roll up to your department goals, to your company goals as a whole. Even if they don't seem directly related, they are obliquely related, and therefore it all works together. So look at your long-term overarching goals, and then this is part of breaking them down into smaller bite-sized pieces. And it's okay to have goals that don't necessarily feed into that, especially when it comes to trying new things and expanding and branching out. But make sure that you have goals that specifically apply to your long-term goals. Make sure that all your goals aren't just busy work for the sake of having goals. That's another thing that's helpful about 300 Things, because it starts to weed out some of the goals that are busy work for you, or things that you're not super interested, or that don't matter to you as much as you thought they did. It's okay to have some goals that are just like, I think this is a fun goal. That's not a problem. But if none of your goals relate to your long-term goals, then why is it on your list of things to do? As long as you're clear about the why, it doesn't super matter, but just be clear about it. 300 Things does help with that clarity, because you'll find the things that aren't super important to you and are just goals for the sake of goals don't actually get done. You don't want that to impact the way that you feel about yourself, though. So by being clear about that, that is one of the things that I like about 300 Things. Your value isn't based off of checking off every single thing on the list. It's so clear that the process is a clarifier to see where your time and energy naturally flows. And if those are the areas that you're enjoying, then you can concentrate more and break them down and be more specific and serious in those areas, versus the other things that you think would be nice to have, but when it comes down to it, you don't actually want to do the work to do it, which is okay. It's about clarifying. Number 8, when do you want to have this done? With 300 Things, it's pretty clear that the objective is within the year, but it's an exercise. Let's see, instead of, I didn't get this done, now I'm a failure. It's very much a clarifying process to see where you naturally want to spend your energy. Whether or not you get the goal done isn't the point. I think that's what makes it different from other like New Year's goal kicks and stuff like that, where you are, I'm not even sure how everyone else comes up with their list of New Year's goals, but it seems very arbitrary of like, I'm gonna go to the gym more, I'm gonna read more books, I'm gonna drink more water, I'm going to take walks every day, I'm going to eat healthier lunches, I'm going to cook at home more, stuff like that. It's vague, and are they good goals? Yes, but what does cooking at home more look like? What does eating healthier look like? What does setting a regular budget look like for you? Define that, break it down, get really specific. When you get more specific, you see that it's much more measurable. You can see that it's much more effective overall. Specific, measurable, attainable, and relevant. The time base for 300 Things, there are some things that are going to end up on your goal list that are going to be longer than a year. It just naturally takes longer than a year. So how do you handle those items? How do you look at those and make sure that you're keeping the things you want on your list? Number 9, realizing that a goal is going to take longer than a year is wonderful. And it still goes on your list of 300 things, but there's not the same expectation to get it done within the year. Of course, with 300 things, that's true of everything. It's more about seeing where your goals are going overall. But when you know the goal is going to take more than a year and you're breaking it down into bite-sized pieces, you look back at your progress over the years and you see everything that you've done that's pulling you closer and closer to that goal. So even though that goal stays on the list for a really long time, you can see that you're making progress towards it. And when you stop making progress or your progress slows, you have the opportunity to look at that and examine it and see what's holding you up. It's not a matter of failure. It's let's see how we're doing, let's see where we're going, let's see what we're interested in, let's see what we enjoy, and from there you can go anywhere. Number 10, if not now, when? So even if your goal is I want to write a book and you haven't started on writing the book, what do you need to do before you write the book in order to write the book? What steps can you take to put you further in that direction? Is it taking a workshop? Is it reading more books? Is it getting a planner and starting to sketch out how you're going to approach this goal? If your first step in a goal is making a plan for how you're going to approach that, that's wonderful. Put that on your list of things. 300 things gets you in the habit of starting to look at things that way, starting to automatically break things down into smaller pieces so that when you put it on your list, you might have 10 things that relate to the same subject that all feed into one overarching, more complicated, more long-term goal. Maybe that ultimate goal takes a couple of years, but again, you will see it being broken down and you will know what your next steps are automatically. And getting in the habit of thinking that way overall changes the process of goal setting. It takes it from a hypothetical to something that you can practically execute. And with the 300 things, you figure out if that's actually a goal that you want to execute. I hope this was helpful. I hope the approach of 300 things transitioning into SMART goals makes sense and is a workable process. I know I've really enjoyed 300 things, and as this is my second year going into what will be my third year of doing 300 things, I've made a lot of progress in the way that I set goals. My goals have gotten a lot more specific, and the categories in which I'm setting goals have started to narrow and get more focused. So I've really enjoyed that. I found it really helpful, and I hope that you'll give it a shot and it'll be helpful to you too. Thank you so much for watching today. I hope to see you next time.